President Trump is threatening, quote, to go in and take care of matters, end quote, in Portland, Oregon if the mayor can't. There have been protests there nearly every night since George Floyd's death. The president tweeting, if the incompetent mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, doesn't get control of his city and stop the anarchists, agitators, rioters, and looters causing great danger to innocent people, we will go in and take care of matters the way they should have been taken care of 100 days ago. Let's talk about the president's words there. Joining me now from Portland, Oregon, sociologist Dr. Randy Blazak, chairman of the Oregon Coalition Against Hate Crime. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
I'd like to begin there with your reaction to President Trump's warning to come to Portland and, as he said, take care of matters.
Yeah, you know, Portland has had a long history of protests. I mean, it's a city sort of founded on dichotomies. And so the protests are really happening in very small sections of the city. And I think there's a perception that Portland is being burnt to the ground by protesters, but it is just a relatively small phenomena that's happening, but it's a reflection of what's happening in the country as a whole as we're facing sort of a decision about how we're going to go forward talking about race. Are we going to open up the conversation and kind of look at our institutions, or are we going to do the old Nixon law and order bit and clamp down and do more of the same? So I think Portland is sort of a reflection of this crossroads that we're in as a country.
Absolutely, and we see video there of police at a Portland riot. Are you concerned that the president's words might bring out extremist groups to these protests?
Yeah, these protests have been very complex phenomena. I mean, we've really seen a lot of different players, different agitators from both the right and the left. We've seen tons of peaceful protests, moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas. I mean, we've seen sort of every stripe that you can imagine, but we've also seen right-wing extremists who have showed up, who have been members of hate groups and militia groups, who have tried to agitate. Some of them just want to take a pot shot at the Black Lives Matter protesters, like we saw in Kenosha. Some of them really want to create something that looks like chaos or anarchy so they can push forward their call for a second American Revolution. It's a hodgepodge, and it is always sort of teetering on the edge of completely collapsing into something that's pretty desperate. The good news is the protesters have largely had to police themselves. They've had to police who's showing up at the protest. In some of these cases, the police have stepped back and not done that. So the protesters have been kind of making sure that the violence doesn't get out of scale, that the right-wingers are identified who are there to agitate. And so it's a strange organic phenomena that's emerged in the streets of Portland.
Right, and you call it a hodgepodge of protesters, and one can understand because there is much to protest in our country right now. The marches in Portland are now also in honor of Jacob Blake, who was shot and paralyzed by police there in Kenosha. What does his story mean to the protest there when it comes to police violence?
Yeah, I think it's really important because what we've seen in the past is a call for reform. We're going to change one little policy here. We're going to ban chokeholds or have police officers wear body cameras. What the most recent case has shown us this deeply woven into the system. This problem of racialized policing is part and parcel of the system. And one of the chants that has popped up in the streets of Portland is no good cops in a racist system. So there might be well-meaning police officers who share values with some of the protesters, but the system itself is rooted in notions of racial control. And so this really helps push forward the narrative that defunding the police means reallocating resources or reconceptualizing the way that we police ourselves. It's broadened this out away from a notion that reform and policy adaptations are the way out to something that looks much different than the way we do policing now.
And do you think that the fact that the Portland protests are this hodgepodge, there's so much that's on the minds of different people, does that in some way dilute what they want to see happen?
It's interesting because there is a lot of spectrum. There is a lot of folks who have different ideas about what the end game is, including what the concept of defund the police means. Some people think it means the complete abolition of police. More people think it means about reallocating funds to make police officers' jobs easier. But one of the things that we've seen, if we compare this to protest movements in the past, the more radical element, the element that sort of gets the media's attention, draws actually sort of mainstream to take a second look at the more moderate voices. So the people that are kind of, setting trash cans on fire may help to actually elevate the moderate position that says, let's talk about reallocating resources as opposed to completely abolishing police departments.
We really appreciate your insights as a sociologist on all of this. Professor Randy Blazak, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate you.
Glad to join you.